nature's beauty and its wrath. The world around us is changing fast.
Hurricanes and tornadoes and many nor'easters, plenty of indicators that weather patterns and climate generally is changing.
As the environment's delicate balance
Our weather is just getting more and more unpredictable.
faces unprecedented challenges.
The last time the Earth was this warm was about 125,000 years ago.
From the unquenchable demands of modern society,
No, not good. It's too hot. This is too hot.
now science is in a race to adapt.
The ecosystem is a puzzle. Each piece is getting influenced in different ways.
And the stakes couldn't be higher.
We have to do this for our children.
A Boston 25 weather special, Climate Matters. Here now, Chief Meteorologist Kevin Lemanowitz and meteorologist Sherry Spear.
We can all feel the changes in the air. This past July was the hottest month ever recorded on Earth, and that followed a record set for the warmest June.
And those rising temperatures just part of how our environment's changing and how we live our lives as well. So today we're going to be exploring the science behind climate change and what it means for us here in New England.
Here in Massachusetts, the average temperature has risen 2.8 degrees since 1970. That compares to a national average increase of 2.5 degrees. It doesn't sound like a lot, but it's the extremes in temperature that are fueling the severe changes in our climate. The tiny peninsula of Winthrop is often Mother Nature's bullseye when a storm bears down on New England.
Pretty tough out here right now.
Boats tossed onto the beach, flooded roads barely passable, and homes overwhelmed with surging tides.
I went down the basement again, and it was water that deep down there, and it happened that fast.
Environmentalist Cindy Lupi has called this North Shore town home for 25 years and says it feels like things are changing.
Recently, especially with that track of nor'easters that we had a few years ago, it seems like both the intensity of the storms and the frequency of the storms are changing in big ways.
Yes, it does. Tornadoes tearing through Cape Cod, historic flooding in the Midwest, mammoth wildfires out west, and searing heat waves. And while some of these events are regular fluctuations in weather, others fit into the bigger trend of climate change. How do we explain to people the difference between climate and weather?
One of the ways I like to do it is to compare weather to your mood on any given day, while climate is more like the personality that you have, generally speaking. But that said, it's also true that climate change is changing the likelihood of certain types of extremes happening. It's changing how intense they are and even how long they last.
Dr. Jennifer Francis is a senior scientist at the Woods Hole Research Center in Falmouth. Can you give me an example here in New England of something that you've seen in your research, or you can point and say, that seems like it's something climate change is causing?
The frequency of heavy precipitation events, there's about 7% more water vapor in the atmosphere than there used to be, say back in the 1970s or so. And that moisture plays a big role in how our climate is changing. So it feeds those heavy precipitation events. Those storms are riding on top of a higher sea now. This is one of the areas on the planet where ocean sea levels are rising the fastest.
Sea level rise here on the Cape is serious, up nearly a foot in the last century. And as that continues to climb, the problems are going to get worse. NOAA projects we're going to go from 2 high tide flood cycles per year in 2000 to up to 30 10 years from now. Research shows that 1 foot of sea level rise doesn't just mean an extra foot of storm surge, it equates to double that, or even more. The Massachusetts coast has some experience with that scenario. Back in 1991, Hurricane Bob sent a 15-foot wall of water into Buzzards Bay. 61 homes were lost, and 50 feet of beachfront eroded on the islands. An even stronger hurricane, juiced by warmer waters and more moisture in the atmosphere, worries Dr. Francis.
If a hurricane did come up this way, it would be able to retain its tropical characteristics much longer.
Away from the coast, a surge in the number of sweltering days is the biggest concern.
We're also starting to see increases in extreme heat days.
Rachel Cletus is with the Union of Concerned Scientists, based in Cambridge. They just released this report, Killer Heat in the United States.
Here in Massachusetts, by mid-century, we could see about a month of heat index days above 90 degrees Fahrenheit. By the end of the century, about 2 months.
Dr. Cletus believes the worst effects will be felt in cities like Boston and Worcester because of the so-called heat island effect, which is when urban areas lack shade and trap heat.
Overall, she says quality of life will suffer.
It really changes the character of a New England summer when you say, oh, you can't hang out all day outside and play in the sun. If the index is so high that it's just physically not safe to be outdoors, that's really going to change life.
That's a thought that's on the mind of Cindy Lupi and her neighbors in Winthrop.
I think everyone is really thinking about those issues and wondering how we prepare if we can continue to live here long term.
Both scientists say the current warming can't be stopped, but it can be slowed down if emissions from burning fossil fuels are reduced drastically. But in the last year, those emissions were up again, both locally and in the U.S. And here's how those emissions, commonly called greenhouse gases, can cause the Earth to heat up. They form a one-way shield in the Earth's atmosphere, allowing the sunlight to get through to warm the Earth's surface like it has for thousands of years. But some of the heat that's created on the Earth's surface today is now prevented from leaving the atmosphere by that shield, causing the temperature to go up. Greenhouse gases include carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, water vapor, and ozone.
With more than 100 miles of coastline and a capital city on the water, Massachusetts has a lot at stake when it comes to climate-related issues. Since the scientific consensus is that we can't stop the planet from warming, the focus then becomes with dealing with the consequences and adjusting to the new normal.
They move the water back to the natural stream channel that was here, and it's able to flow and do what it should do all on its own.
This is the Tidmarsh Wildlife Sanctuary in Plymouth, a former cranberry bog that the Massachusetts Audubon Society restored as natural wetlands.
It's the largest freshwater restoration in New England.
9 dams were taken out as part of a multi-million-dollar effort to connect this marshland back to the ocean.
And when you have a dam there and a major flood event happens, water can't get out, but also water can't get up. So there's no place for the water to go, and that's when it spills out onto our roadways and into our homes.
Wetlands are often called nature's sponge because they can naturally soak up floodwaters. Many have been lost to development over the years, but as climate adaptation moves to the front burner, protecting and restoring them has taken on a new urgency.
Because it's reconnected to the ocean for the first time in 130 years, it will even help reduce the impacts of sea level rise. This will help absorb some of that impact that would otherwise be borne completely by the coastal properties.
A recent report estimated 90,000 homes in Massachusetts will be threatened by chronic flooding.
That house across the street, that's the third one that's been there since we've been coming here.
Houses losing their battle with the ocean.
They keep rebuilding in these flood hazard areas with federal taxpayer dollars going behind them, and we need to stop that insanity.
There's also the threat to infrastructure. Take a look at this road in Oklahoma. It literally buckled from the intense heat this summer.
Oh my God!
Here in New England, many roads that never flooded before are now often underwater.
There's 7,500 miles all across the East Coast that are vulnerable to this, so it's not just a Boston or a Dorchester problem.
Jennifer Jacobs is a UNH professor of civil and environmental engineering. She authored a report that found all the storms that have been hitting the Northeast are aging roads and bridges in ways we can't see.
If the road is still wet from the surface on down, it means that when we put a heavy vehicle on it, we are going to damage that road. And so the road repairs, instead of needing to be repaired every 20 to 30 years, might need to be repaired the following year. It is expensive.
Even more so if roads and bridges need to be redesigned. So they're built at higher elevations or even relocated.
None of it is cheap.
Rob DeLeo is a professor at Bentley University. He specializes in climate adaptation policy. He says building consensus can be a challenge, as voters tend to be more preoccupied with funding traditional services like schools and public safety.
Climate adaptation, by contrast, asks them to prepare for events that may or may not occur for months down the line. Even when climate change adaptation is working successfully, it's oftentimes not particularly observable for a lot of voters.
Dramatic restoration of the property.
Bob Wilbur of Mass Audubon is encouraged that adaptation is getting more attention on the state and municipal level, particularly as the federal government isn't making climate change a priority right now.
Just within the last 18 months, we're seeing more and more communities understand that they are going to have to make accommodations, and we're seeing state government coming out with funding to help those communities implement changes.
Which in some cases, like here in Plymouth, can be a beautiful thing. A report from the Center for Climate Integrity that came out this summer put a price tag on what it will cost to protect infrastructure in coastal communities. The total, $400 billion to protect against sea level rise over the next 20 years. Barnstable County was the third highest nationally, coming in at just over $7 billion.
And that part makes me nervous, which is why I've got a certain amount of urgency about this.
A call to action from the state's leader.
The longer we wait on this, the harder it's going to be to actually come up with a plan.
Kevin Lemanowitz sits down with Governor Charlie Baker to find out why he's willing to spend $1 billion to address climate change. Plus, allergies escalating every year.
I'm usually not allergic, but I've noticed this year just feeling the effects.
The role climate is playing in your health when this Boston 25 weather special, Climate Matters, returns. This is a Boston 25 weather special, Climate Matters.
Governor Charlie Baker has become an outspoken supporter of preparing our state for climate change. He testified on Capitol Hill, and he filed a bill with a price tag of more than $1 billion to help cities and towns. I recently sat down with the governor to ask him why this is now one of his priorities. Would you say there's anything specifically that drives you when it comes to this topic, that makes you care so much about it?
It's like a lot of things that aren't going to sort of happen today, right? You can just put it off till tomorrow or the day after or the day after. And this one feels to me like one of those issues where we just need to get started.
What are your concerns most about the coast right now?
The game along the coast has changed. And the rising sea levels, the water temperatures, the frequency of the storms and the severity of the storms, and the surge that comes with all that is a game changer. You now have flooding and significant damage being done in places that were never hit. And over the course of my 4.5 years here, I visited, after storms, a whole number of places and spaces and communities along the coast where the first thing somebody says to me is, you know, I've been here for 50 years and I've never seen this before.
So it sounds like here in Massachusetts, we've got a lot of adapting to do.
I mean, one of the things we've tried to do is promote this idea of creating an expendable trust, which would create roughly $130 million a year that the Commonwealth, not just along the coast, but across the state, could put into vulnerability planning and resiliency efforts. This was something we started 3 years ago as a voluntary effort, and it's now baked into state legislation, and we've got 71% of our 351 cities and towns that have worked with us on vulnerability planning.
I think most people watching will think about the coast first when it comes to climate change. But you've been doing a lot of work with this and inland locations, climate change and inland locations. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, first of all, there are literally thousands of culverts in Massachusetts. And I think most people know that culverts are literally the mechanism that sort of traps and manages storm water runoff. And they were built, most of them, for a very different time. So what ends up happening is downtowns flood, bridges flood, roads flood, backyards flood.
People you mentioned about have never seen things happen before that are happening now. Do you get the sense that they are ready to change their way of life and do what's necessary to adapt to this changing climate?
I mean, a lot of the people I talk to who've been hit by storms or sort of other disruptions along the way have said, to me anyway, when I've been there, I'd really like to not see this kind of thing happen again. And they're not talking about the storm, they're talking about the damage. And there's really only one way to get at the damage, and that's to do things to prepare for it, to adapt, to be more resilient, to make some of the investments that are necessary.
Obviously, this topic has become very politically divided over the past couple decades, let's say. And you are not clearly in line with a lot of the Republican view on climate change. Why not?
Well, I think for me the big issue is sort of, in addition to sort of seeing is believing. I mean, the fact that 20 days after I took office in 2015, it started snowing and snowed for the next 28 days. And we've had hurricanes and tornadoes and many nor'easters and just plenty of indicators that weather patterns and climate generally is changing. And I've had some folks over from MIT who've done presentations for us that indicate that the ball game here is just different and it's going to stay different. But I do worry that the longer we wait on this, the harder it's going to be to actually come up with a plan and implement it. And that part makes me nervous, which is why I've got a certain amount of urgency about this.
Sherry, the governor said he'd like the state to be carbon neutral by 2050.
Is that realistic?
It's certainly not going to be easy, but he's a big supporter of offshore wind turbines, and he's working hard to bring hydropower from Canada into the state. In 2018, Massachusetts generated about 2/3 of its electricity from natural gas. The state also stopped producing electricity from coal last year, making us the 3rd state in New England to attain that goal.
With droughts and fluctuations in temperatures, it's hard to think of another industry that depends on weather as much as agriculture. We were recently down at Freitas Farm, a landmark in Middleborough that's been in the same family for generations. Scott Freitas told us he's definitely noticed a change in the climate and it impacts his crops.
Things have been changing. We used to have 6 feet of snow, and now it seems like we get a little bit of snow but a lot of rain.
Just last month, a report from the United Nations said the world's agricultural industry will be challenged to feed the planet because of stresses associated with climate change. That includes higher temperatures and more severe floods and droughts. Here's one novel way those changes will be monitored, at least in central Massachusetts, by a tree that tweets.
This is one of the phenocams, so they are normal webcams, digital cameras that actually take an image every 30 minutes.
That's right, Harvard researchers have wired this 100-year-old oak in Petersham and put it online. The tree is collecting all kinds of data about the changing weather it's experiencing, and with some technological help, it's sharing it with people via the Twitter handle @AWitnessTree. Researchers say the data the tree collects is scientifically valuable and will help people understand how other organisms are responding to climate change.
Trees are incredibly resilient. They have to stay in one place for their entire lives. This tree has been standing here for 100 years. And so we can learn from this tree about how you can respond to change over time.
This past July, during one of those brutal heat waves, the tree tweeted, "Yesterday, it was very hot, with a daily average of 80.5 degrees Fahrenheit. It was the 24th hottest day I can remember."
We actually saw up to a 200% increase in the amount of pollen being produced.
From allergies to triple E.
And there's a real question, is that happening because the mosquitoes are being allowed to live in climates that were previously too cold?
How climate is affecting your health. And later,
We've actually had a number of new wineries open in the region.
wine grapes growing where they couldn't before. Climate's impact on what we eat and drink.
Business itself is booming.
When Climate Matters continues.
As human beings, we're part of the ecosystem too. That means our health and well-being is affected as the world around us changes. Boston 25 News meteorologist Jason Brewer found out the consequences can run the gamut from being a nuisance to life-threatening.
Tissue after tissue.
I was sneezing a lot.
First, a pill, and then a snort.
I'm usually not allergic to pollen at all. It usually doesn't affect me, but I've noticed this year just feeling the effects.
This spring was an allergy apocalypse. Just about everything encrusted in a coating of pollen.
Well, it was pretty bad. I mean, I watched it on top of the water, on top of everything.
This is ragweed. It's the #1 most allergenic species in North America.
Jennifer Albertine teaches at Mount Holyoke College and is also an allergy sufferer. She wanted to see how plants will respond to increasing levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. That's one of the gases which is a byproduct of burning fossil fuels.
It's basically plant food, right? So plants uptake carbon dioxide.
She set up an experiment in a greenhouse and monitored pollen production when plants were surrounded by greater concentrations of carbon dioxide.
So we looked at levels that were going to be here by about 2100, and we saw that per flower there was a 50% increase in the amount of pollen being produced. And then overall, when you looked at all the number of flowers, we actually saw up to a 200% increase in the amount of pollen being produced because of increase in flowering and also pollen.
Dr. Jim Recht of Cambridge is a volunteer with the Physicians for Social Responsibility, a group that believes climate change is one of the greatest health threats facing humanity in the 21st century. He says more allergies is just one of the first dominoes that's falling.
We know that higher pollen counts exacerbate environmental allergies. We know that exacerbations of allergies are in turn also linked to asthma exacerbations.
The warmer, wetter climate already emerging in New England is also welcoming more insects and the diseases they carry.
They can live in places that they didn't used to live before.
Dr. Aaron Bernstein is co-director of the Center for Climate Health and the Global Environment at Harvard's School of Public Health.
They're seeing Lyme disease in places in Canada they've never seen. There are other diseases like Eastern equine encephalitis. We've seen cases of that steadily move north into New Hampshire, Vermont, and so forth. And there's a real question, is that happening because the mosquitoes are being allowed to live in climates that were previously too cold?
Even the recent algae bloom on the Charles River is linked to the changing environment.
We've seen evidence that they're marching northward from, the tropical areas of the planet to further northern regions.
But the biggest threat to human health?
No, not good. It's too hot. This is too hot.
My house is like 95 degrees.
Comes from hotter and hotter temperatures.
It can be deadly. And we've seen this time and again. And so the challenge is we're sort of slowly boiling the frog here.
A spiking thermometer is really bad news for the elderly and very young, whose bodies don't cool as efficiently. There's also a disparity along socioeconomic lines as well.
The wealthier among us, the more well-to-do, the more privileged among us, have a greater responsibility in having created this climate crisis. And those who are innocent or have contributed less to it are proportionately more vulnerable to the toxic effects of it.
And this is one spot that we could see a more immediate payoff, and that's good for us and the planet, right, Jason?
For sure. If we cut carbon emissions now, the planet is expected to keep warming. However, Dr. Bernstein believes that cutting greenhouse gases can have immediate health benefits. For example, if we drive less, we're going to have fewer respiratory problems because there's less emissions in the air. If we eat less red meat, we're cutting greenhouse gases, and it's also just better for our health. And riding a bike, always a good call for your health and also helping to reduce those greenhouse emissions.
Still ahead, parts of Boston underwater.
My concern is if we have a storm like a Sandy or a major hurricane hit this region, are we prepared to be able to protect our residents? And right now, we're talking about evacuation.
The plans in the works to protect this city on the harbor. And later,
a warmer environment is having an impact on all facets of our ecosystem, what local scientists are discovering when they dive off New England's coast.
Climate Matters, a Boston 25 weather special, is back after this. You're watching Climate Matters, a Boston 25 weather special. Here again, Chief Meteorologist Kevin Lemanowitz and meteorologist Sherry Spear.
Welcome back. We're standing in front of a $1 million view of Boston's waterfront. It's a view that's changed dramatically over the past decade as development in the seaport took off.
Yeah, and even though this harbor is usually considered one of the city's biggest assets, concerns are growing that it's going to become one of the biggest threats.
It doesn't look like a seawall. It's disguised by grass and trees and bushes and plants and things like that. In the case of a bad storm, it would really serve a different purpose here.
The first purpose of Martin's Park is to honor Martin Richard, the boy from Dorchester who lost his life in the Boston Marathon bombings. Its second function is to protect the seaport from rising waters. This park is also a seawall.
And we're looking to do something like this around the 47 miles of shoreline that we have in the city of Boston. Create a barrier that can be built that protects people, neighborhoods, houses, buildings, businesses from sea level rise, from the ocean coming in, but also connecting people back to the harbor.
Martin's Park is just one part of the city's extensive plan to make Boston resilient to climate change. The historic flood of January 2018 made that mission even more urgent as the swollen harbor overwhelmed parts of the seaport and Long Wharf, actually sending a dumpster floating down the street.
Boston is particularly vulnerable in terms of the coastal issues because so much of our waterfront is built on fill. Back in the 1800s, they built it to deal with the present flood levels then, which are a lot lower than they are now.
Paul Kirshen is co-founder of the Sustainable Solutions Lab at UMass Boston.
This is the possible extent 100-year flood.
He says areas in East Boston and the Back Bay were artificially created hundreds of years ago, as was a heavily developed seaport. That makes those areas extremely vulnerable if the city doesn't adapt quick enough.
The challenge is going to be actually paying for it. How is it going to be paid? And when are they going to start construction? because there's some areas that are vulnerable right now, and of course that vulnerability is only going to increase over time.
We don't have a choice.
City Councilor Lydia Edwards represents 3 of the most vulnerable communities: the North End, Charlestown, and East Boston.
We're making sure it's more resilient. We're updating a lot of the grass.
She said projects like the renovation of Langone Park along Commercial Street can make a big difference in easing the blow of rising waters. But she also believes the city has to be aggressive in trying to reduce carbon emissions. Edwards is pushing for more ferry service in the harbor to get cars off the road and wants to see the private sector do more to help the city.
A lot of developers, through their own volition, are starting to go ahead and lift up the mechanicals in the buildings. But I think a lot of the city could be pushing for is how not only making your building resilient is part of your goal, but making sure the neighborhood it's in is equally resilient.
The neighborhoods, not the glistening towers that now define the harbor skyline, are also the mayor's biggest concern.
We saw the channel here. As sea level rises, it comes over the boardwalk.
Particularly if a worst-case scenario ever happened. Rising waters from the Fort Point Channel go inland and meet the ocean on the other side of Moakley Park at Carson Beach.
My concern is if we have a storm like a Sandy or a major hurricane hit this region, or a nor'easter for that matter, what are the impacts to the residents? Are we prepared to be able to protect our residents? And right now, we're talking about evacuation.
Other cities are also updating their emergency plans. In New York City, their mayor wants to extend Lower Manhattan 500 feet into the East River to protect against flooding. And in San Francisco, the focus is rebuilding a 100-year-old seawall.
Even small changes in temperature can have drastic effects on wildlife. Hundreds of species face potential extinction unless climate change is curbed. That list includes polar bears, bumblebees, coral reef, and monarch butterflies. As Boston 25 News meteorologist Vicki Graff found out, even some species living in the waters off New England are struggling to survive.
Divers take the plunge off Appledore Island, a 45-minute boat ride from Portsmouth. The objective, to survey the bottom of the ocean floor and collect seaweed samples.
The Gulf of Maine has been changing rapidly in the past few years.
Areas that were once filled with tall, wavy strands of kelp are being replaced by invasive species of seaweed that like warm water.
This is an invasive species, the green fleece algae.
For 15 years, UNH professor Jennifer Dykstra has been scouring the ocean floor in the Gulf of Maine, a huge swath of water that stretches from Nova Scotia all the way down to Cape Cod. Along with PhD candidate Brandon O'Brien, she's collecting samples of aquatic plants that are becoming more plentiful and trying to determine how they're changing the ecosystem in the waters off New England.
They're essentially taking over places where kelp would normally occupy. Kelp enhances the biodiversity of an ecosystem, so it enhances kind of the number of species that are in the system.
Losing kelp sets off a domino effect, upsetting the delicate balance of life.
A lot of the fish that use kelp to hide under it, they need to find some other place to hide. And then the crabs and the lobsters are more exposed, so higher order predators can see them.
Something else is at play here in the Gulf of Maine, the rate at which it's heating up. In fact, the only body of water warming faster is the Arctic Ocean.
The Gulf of Maine is warming faster than 99% of the world's oceans. So things are changing really rapidly here. Unfortunately, it is kind of the epicenter of where to look at climate change impacts to marine systems.
Regional favorites like lobster and cod might no longer find these waters a place where they can thrive.
They're both bottom-dwelling species that like cold water. And so a lot of lobstermen are reporting, and we have data to support this, that lobsters are going further out sooner.
Jennifer Seavey is the director of the Shoals Marine Laboratory, a joint research venture between UNH and Cornell University. She says climate change is changing a way of life here.
The lobsters are moving offshore more quickly, and that's a huge ramification for a lobster person, right? They have to switch their gear so they can fish deeper water, so different gear, longer lines, more gas. It's more dangerous to go offshore.
These scenic waters and panoramic vistas hide not only the scope of changes causing turmoil below the ocean's surface, but also of what we all stand to lose.
Whether it's recreation or food or history, culture, I mean, the Gulf of Maine is an amazing, rich maritime culture.
Vicki, that's really interesting that the Gulf of Maine is warming so fast. But why is it?
There are a couple of factors that researchers believe could be at play here. First is the shape of the Gulf of Maine and how shallow it is in some parts, like Georges Bank, for instance. That's what has always made it such a rich fishing ground, but it also means it heats up faster. Scientists are also looking at how the current that flows into the Gulf plays a role.
Ahead,
wine growers are starting to harvest a lot earlier.
climate's impact on your favorite wines.
It's really changing the quality and the taste.
Plus, from the rooftop to the basement, simple changes you can make at home to cut down on your carbon footprint and save money when this Boston 25 weather special returns. You're watching Climate Matters, a Boston 25 weather special.
Winemaking goes back to the earliest days of civilization. But with climate change, the industry is facing new, unprecedented challenges. Boston 25 News meteorologist Jason Brewer explains how local researchers are leading efforts to see how winemakers can still thrive in an uncertain environment.
I have our Crescent White blend. This is an 100% estate blend of Traminette, Vidal, and Aramella grapes.
Alex Bienvenu makes wine at the Glendale Ridge Vineyard in Southampton, a new winery that uses hybrid grapes, fruit that is created by a marriage of traditional plants and those that might be a little hardier.
It's a balance of offering tradition and then new things that people might like trying as well.
Changing the time-honored traditions in winemaking is challenging, but it might be necessary.
With climate change, buds and leaves are coming out at different times than they used to. And wine grapes are sensitive not only with their leaves, but also when their fruits develop and when they mature. And so this time in between when they first develop until they mature is shortening.
Kat Chamberlain is a researcher at the Arnold Arboretum in Jamaica Plain. She says weather plays a huge role in how wine tastes.
Wine growers are starting to harvest a lot earlier, which is leading to higher alcohol content, possibly more acidity, less sugar content, and it's really changing the quality and the taste that we're used to with a lot of these varieties.
Chamberlain is part of a team trying to encourage winemakers to go beyond using a dozen or so popular grapes that create the majority of wine.
And there are so many varieties that would actually really match this shift in climate. They have shorter growing seasons, and if wine growers start utilizing these other varieties, we might be able to keep up with the shifts in climate.
Those predicted shifts are severe. Consider that the Champagne region of France could be just too hot to grow champagne grapes, and the weather in England could be just right. Researchers at UMass's Stockbridge School of Agriculture are working with other scientists around the country to develop hybrid grapes that can withstand changing weather patterns.
We're gathering data from different climates, different soils, the length of the growing season is also important. Lots of different factors that go into the performance of a particular variety.
They're finding that some of the popular varieties might actually be able to survive warmer New England winters, but could also be harmed by more rain.
Hey, we just don't know. With climate change, it's hard to say what's going to happen.
At least one winemaker is keeping his glass half full.
If I was living in a different region, I might be a little bit more pessimistic, but living in New England, I'm very optimistic. We've actually had a number of new wineries open in the region. The business itself is booming.
Something to toast, at least in the short run. Jason Brewer, Boston 25 News.
It's believed the American wine industry will have an easier time adapting because it's not confined by the strict laws that oversee producers in Europe.
We've talked a lot about industries and government taking steps to address climate matters, but you and I can have an impact too. Boston 25 News meteorologist Vicki Graff takes us on a tour of a Cambridge home for some tips on reducing your carbon footprint.
From the roof to the basement, Megan Shaw with the Cambridge Energy Alliance says there are lots of ways to make your home energy efficient and cut down on greenhouse gas emissions.
We really talk about energy efficiency as being the first fuel because it really is the least expensive way to take action.
We started at the top.
We had this roof redone a couple years ago, and at the same time that we did that, we did take advantage of the Mass Save program's deep discounts on insulation. And you can see that they added these little hi-hats so that we could insulate our attic space a lot more.
Shaw says white roofing, like you see here, reflects the heat in the summer.
And you can see that our neighbor has actually taken advantage of their solar potential. They have panels that are generating both solar electricity as well as solar hot water.
Back inside, we focus on temperature control.
Smart thermostats are great because they actually, unlike a programmable thermostat where you'd have to change things manually, these actually learn when you're home and when you're away. And if you happen to leave your house when you've set it, you know, like as if you're home, you can use your smartphone to change it. And so in the summertime, these rooms actually get a ton of light in the morning and throughout the day. So we just pull these down and it actually prevents that solar heat gain. And a really easy thing to do is to get insulated curtains. And in the wintertime, pull them closed so that you don't get that draftiness actually flowing into your room. You know, these are from IKEA. They're inexpensive. These are not big, expensive changes. So one thing that people don't think about when they're thinking about greenhouse gas emissions is how much energy it takes to actually clean their water at a water treatment plant. So that's why water saving measures are really important. The Mass Save program actually offers free faucet aerators. They reduce the amount of water that flows out of your faucet, but it doesn't actually change the feeling of the water.
And one of the water saving measures you can do is just with your dishwasher.
Yeah, you know, I mean, we only run this dishwasher when it's completely full. So, you know, you're not wasting water on an empty load. Wash your clothes on cold water. People often forget that it takes an incredible amount of energy to heat the water in their home and actually really raises their utility bills.
Next, we head down to the basement.
This furnace is energy efficient, but it does run off of natural gas. It's actually a great way to long-term think about reducing your greenhouse gas emissions, is think ahead about these big replacement opportunities. Air source heat pumps move you away from fossil fuels because they can run off of clean electricity. This air sealing is free through the Mass Save program. You can see it's all around the pipes that lead to the outside. It's all around the rim joist. It prevents cold air from coming into your home all winter long. These hot water heaters, you can see, actually have an energy guide, and all of your equipment that you buy is going to have an energy guide, so you can compare how much it's actually going to cost you to use. There's deep discounts. There's lots of work that Mass Save will do in your home for free. It's available for renters, homeowners, landlords, and so we really encourage people to really get the value that they've already paid in.
Easy, inexpensive steps to cut your bills and your greenhouse gas emissions. Meteorologist Vicki Graff, Boston 25 News.
Mass Save is a great resource for anyone looking to improve efficiency in their homes. You can find more information on these money-saving rebates at masssave.com or on our website, boston25news.com.
Coming up, the woods around Walden Pond, revealing clues about how our climate is changing.
It's been really astonishing, and we keep discovering new things.
How a famous author's writings in Concord are helping scientists today. When Climate Matters continues.
With radar and satellites, there's a lot of high-tech gear that tracks the impact of weather today. Back in the 1850s, Henry David Thoreau kept detailed notes about plants and animals in his time at Walden Pond.
Now Boston 25 News meteorologist Vicki Graff explains one local scientist is actually using those handwritten notes to draw conclusions about how our climate is changing.
Thoreau was very interested in blueberries, so he recorded the flowering time of blueberries, he recorded the leafing out time of blueberries, and also the fruit maturation time of blueberries.
For 8 years in the 1850s, Henry David Thoreau had great interest in the world around him at Walden Pond, taking detailed notes on 300 plant species.
We managed to track down a copy of these unpublished observations of Thoreau, and as soon as we saw these records in the fall of 2003, we knew that this was fantastic, that this was a gold mine of environmental observations.
Boston University biologist Richard Premack started wandering through the Walden woods himself, comparing Thoreau's findings to the situation today.
Plants are flowering about 10 days earlier now in Concord than they did in Thoreau's time because it's warmer now. And also, that interestingly, we've discovered that trees are actually more responsive to climate change than the wildflowers, which is a very interesting observation that no one had ever really discovered before. Some bird species are arriving a little bit earlier, like hummingbirds.
Premack says New England is a good place to track the effects of climate change, both because of archival notes like Thoreau's and because of what's happening here.
New England has warmed up about twice as much as the rest of the country. So we've experienced a lot of disproportionate amount of warming in southern New England in comparison to other areas of the United States. And you really can see the effects of climate in so many ways in all seasons.
Professor Primack tells us that they've also noticed some of the cold-loving species like orchids and lilies that Thoreau noted completely disappear from the Walden Woods area. In Concord, Vicki Graff, Boston 25 News.
Thoreau also kept notes on how thick the ice was on Walden Pond. These BU researchers are finding it's much thinner in recent winters than it was back in Thoreau's day.
Pieces of New England history once on land, now ending up in the water.
Early colonial brick from a central chimney.
The race to find a solution before that history is lost. When Climate Matters continues.
Rising sea levels and powerful nor'easters have really put the focus on how coastal communities are affected by climate change.
And now researchers are finding another problem. Some of our regional history is simply being washed away.
This is early colonial brick from a central chimney of the Garrison house. And we found the edge, the very back edge of the house that was clearly, we found early colonial ceramics, pipes, everything that dated from the early 1600s to date the site.
UNH archaeology professor Megan Howie has been digging around pre-colonial sites along New Hampshire's coast and is finding more and more artifacts are now in the water.
This area was born from the water in, not the land out, you know, so now that the water's rising, that's the trouble. We've lost about, in 10 years, about 25 feet of shoreline here.
Her research has discovered that up to 14% of New Hampshire's cultural heritage is threatened by sea level rise, including a dozen sites on the National Register of Historical Places.
But the threat's not gone from what I typically would think of development. It's like this other, more subtle, more pervasive threat, and it's really shocking and sad, yeah.
Rising tides and rising groundwater are now approaching historic treasures like Strawberry Bank, a 10-acre compound in Portsmouth that celebrates the colonial era.
This is one of the houses that's sitting on what used to be the waterway called Puddle Dock, and it's also one of the buildings that's suffering.
This time-lapse video shot during an astronomically high tide in 2017 tells the story. Saltwater bubbling up and flooding the basement of a home built in 1795.
You can see the water during those storms and astronomically high tides reached the dehumidifier, even though we put it on this platform. But this is actually salt water coming in from the Piscataqua River. And salt water is much more damaging and accelerates the decay of our buildings.
Another historic home at Strawberry Bank was recently reinforced with 4 inches of concrete and a new pumping system. But you can see how the pressure from a nor'easter actually cracked the new floor. Rodney Rowland says these remedies are expensive and they're also causing some soul searching for historians.
It's got to be balanced with our preservation goals to a certain degree, but it may be that we need to rethink some of those preservation guidelines in order to come to a solution that will actually work.
The stakes are high and will determine whether future generations can learn history by experiencing it.
America was born on the coast inland, right? So like it's everywhere. It's not just New England, but New England, I mean, I think of Faneuil Hall, I think of Boston is just sitting, all that history is right on the water.
Tourism is another big concern. I mean, a lot of these historic locations along the New England coastline draw people from around the world.
Yeah, and when you take a look at this magnificent skyline behind us, you can see why it's a big draw and something to keep a close eye on. That's a wrap for this Boston 25 weather special, Climate Matters. We'll continue the conversation on our website, boston25news.com.
And from the entire Boston 25 News weather team, thanks for joining us.
Have a great night.